tech lead for 96 boards. I'm in this job for roughly about 3 months now. Before that, I was tech lead for the power management working group at Linaro. And I'm going to talk about something that Linaro, this was one of the first things that Linaro was supposed to solve as part of its founding charter, the Kernel and Bootloader consolidation. It's all software. Yeah, so, and we are back doing it for ARM64 now, hopefully. Yes. Yeah. So I'm going to talk about, this talk is focused around our work on the 64-bit platforms. But it's good to have the ARM SOC maintainers here to actually share some of their experiences with the 32-bit platforms as well. So what's the reference platform kernel? I've invented a new acronym here, RPK, just something else to take back home. We use this in the reference platform build. We don't do a whole lot of work in the reference platform kernel. What we really do is pull in stuff from our landing teams, from our segment groups. These are the guys who are doing all the hard work of maintaining tip-based branches. Our current version that we released on Friday, it was a Saturday before Connect, is based on 4.4. And the idea behind the reference platform kernel is to have one single source tree and one binary that runs across the 96 boards that are publicly available and across several platforms of interest. When I say platforms of interest, it doesn't have to be just 96 boards. It's other member hardware that we have access to, especially on the enterprise side of things. So that was one of the goals of putting together this kernel. And a lot of people have asked, is this Linux Linaro rebranded? And the answer to that is yes and no. Linux Linaro started out trying to do something similar, but what ended up happening is we stopped supporting a lot of platforms in the sense that we were just rebasing code that no one had ever tried to get merged upstream, and we were just rebasing them on kernel version after kernel version after kernel version, at which point no one even bothered testing some of that. And so one of the goals is to try and avoid that problem by dropping code, which is a novel idea. But we are going to drop code if you are not working upstream. That's the founding goal for reference platform kernel. I want to be able to see these patches that I merge in there being worked on upstream for me to keep them in there. I'm hoping for this to be an interactive session. The layout of this room is not optimal. I would have preferred a smaller room for this. But please ask questions, interrupt me at any point in time. So can anyone place this scene? Leif? Perfect. Thank you. So this is a scene from the movie The Good, Bad, and the Ugly, Clint Eastwood. What is interesting, so this is the classical Mexican standoff, and I'm using that analogy here. So we have board vendors who want to sell millions of these devices, millions of these 96 boards, right, to these hobbyists. We have core developers, especially people in this conference here, people who want to work on bootloaders, kernels. They want really good driver support. They want to stabilize things. They want to work on KVM. They want to add security extensions. And then there's, of course, the board vendors, the SoC vendors who are actually underwriting some of this effort. And the problem we're facing really is some of these people are not talking to each other, or they don't think that the other party is important for some of these efforts. And what I'm trying to say here is that each of these groups are important. for 96 boards, for the ARM ecosystem. If you say that I only want to sell millions of boards, I don't care about the kernel, 318 is just fine, I disagree. I think if you don't get core developers involved, people who are working on the tool chains and the kernels and the bootloaders, you will not get as robust a platform. Yes, you will ship something, something that works, something that enables most of the hardware, but it won't be the best possible platform out there, and it'll be obsolete in a year's time. I mean, I think we all have a drawer full of boards which are no longer supported upstream, or we don't receive software updates for, and this is not what we want 96 boards to become. The term I use, which I don't think a lot of execs would like, is a graveyard of boards. Basically because we did one software release, maybe another software release, and then we stopped supporting them. So that's what we could end up with if we don't work upstream, we don't work with these core developers. So that's the key focus for me as far as keeping this 96 board platform alive, keeping the reference platform kernel alive. And this is something I believe we failed at with our Linux Linaro effort. So using the good, bad, ugly theme, let's talk about the good first. With the reference platform kernel that we released on, and the build that we released on Saturday, it's a 4.4 kernel. It's a single config. It's a single kernel config that works across the 296 boards, High Key and Dragon board, and across a bunch of enterprise boards. So that's the D02, the Seattles, the overdrives, APMX Gene, and one other board that I am forgetting. We'll come back to that. Oh, it's right there, HP ProLiant, the HP ProLiant M400. So it's a mix of UEFI/ACPI and device tree platforms, and it just works off of a single kernel image, single kernel binary image. Why is this important? Because while trying to do this, we found a bunch of problems in each of the individual trees. And since we are trying to get all of this merged, it's nice to be able to find these problems before we try to get this merged upstream. So that's the good side of things, where this is done. It exists today. It's on GitHub. So if you go to GitHub/96boards linux.git, there is a release branch, 96b/releases/1603. That'll give you all of this. The config, let me talk about that for a second. The config is basically a distro-like config in the sense that we enable everything. We enable everything that's possible as a module, we enable it, which means that it's not optimal for a kernel developer to take that config and do that, because it's going to take a while to build. It builds a lot of things. We'll get to that. We are trying to fix that problem. We'll get to that in a bit. Yeah. Could you pass this on as well?
Pass that down somewhere. So it would be good to also have the upstream dev-config file at least boot, even if it doesn't enable all the features. But make sure that like all these platforms should at least boot it with a UART and an DRAMFS at the very minimum. With an upstream kernel.
So for the platforms on here, I believe that's already the case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if that's the bare minimum, we should also make sure that.
But I don't want to stop there. I mean, I don't want to stop there.
Yes,
that's
I think we need two configs. We have the upstream dev config file,
yeah,
and you probably don't need to change that much. And if you need to change it, that's one more patch that you get upstream. And then you have the config that you use for building the binary that you distribute, which enables tons of other things. and both of them should just work on all the platforms.
Yeah, so that's good feedback. So make sure that defconfig enables enough of the platform. Everything that's already merged should be in defconfig. Yes.
Which question from my side for you mostly? What kind of support do you think that would be useful to always include as part of the default defconfig, besides just the ARC and the very basics? Because I know that some include networks, some include like other pieces
like
of the
USB
stack.
network adapters.
It seems that there's not like kind of a standard set of configs.
So anything that you need for booting must be included, built in. Anything that is generally useful, like common networking options, should be enabled. Anything that can be a loadable module and might be useful to some people, like the USB networking, USB storage, some PCI devices, those things should be loadable modules if they're not needed for booting on any of the systems.
Okay. So this, I believe, solves one of my pet peeves my first 5 years at Linaro, which is in the power management working group, which was, first we didn't have access to hardware. And when we did have access to hardware, the software release were so behind what mainline was at, that any of the work that the steering committee has asked us to do, I mean, there's no way I can develop EAS on a 318 kernel. There's no way I can do some of the work on the KVM and Core Site and various other projects across Linaro on such ancient kernels. And so that's one segment that I can address with this. But that's not the only segment. I believe that this is, in general, beneficial to the entire ecosystem, including the hobbyists. Is there a question? Go down. Could you use the mic, please?
Yeah, just some information. At this moment, in the mainline kernel for high key, you can build it directly from the mainline def config file and get the kernel run on the high key. It has very minimum features like UART is supported, but we are still trying to add more def configs and more DTB bindings into future kernel. Yeah. So right now you get a minimum system, and the upstreaming effort is going on.
Yes, and there are cases where we need to do a better job of tracking on some of those patches and make sure that our maintainers are actually putting that into Linux Next. So we've learned a lesson there this week that we need to keep in mind going forward. So yeah, absolutely. So on the config side, we've had to make a few unoptimal choices. So if you're running on the enterprise versus running on the mobile, so things like IO scheduler, the value for hertz and so forth. But I don't think that's that critical. This is not supposed to be a production-ready platform on day one. It's just an enabler. So anyone can go into that config and change those values at some point. So let's get to the bad. So if we've done the good, let's get to the bad. So that's the stat, 828 patches on top of 4.4. That was what was required to enable all of these platforms. Sorry? There's a diff stat somewhere. It's coming. But 828, who was in the previous talk about the 1.7 million lines of code diff? So yeah, so I think we are in a much better shape on the 64-bit side in some cases. And a lot of these patches are already being discussed upstream. They're being reviewed upstream. So I'll get to the statistics of some of that in a bit. The problems. Everybody has been testing with everything compiled into the kernel. As soon as you start making them into modules, things just break. You need to fix those. So that's one of the actions for me, to go back and file bugs against all these drivers that can't be modules. And it's not just one platform. There's everybody had these problems. We have ignored most of the kernel CI failures because we were only focusing on ARM64. But my next step is to go back and fix up anything that we break on other architectures, whether it's ARM32 or x86 or other things. So that's something I need to go back and fix. But that's the bad bit. Now let's get to the ugly bits. I am a terrible maintainer. That's really ugly. So why? This was the first time I'm doing this in a while now, and I didn't get any Git commit templates in place to actually help me with some of this stuff, which I'm discovering now that I'm trying to mine all this data and trying to get some statistics out of that. We didn't finish annotating all the out-of-tree patches to make it easy to extract out later. Again, I'm going to do that once I revisit this tree. I'm a terrible maintainer as far as not carrying patches that are not going upstream. So if you are not targeting upstream, I'm not going to carry your patches for too long. I'll put it in once, I'll put it in twice, but then I'll remove it from my tree. And the other thing I've had some issues with is there's some one-off patches, so things that don't quite fit into one platform or the other platform. It's a hack that's needed to get everything to build together. I have a branch called orphan patches, and so tracking that across releases is going to be hard. So that's something I need to work on. Many patches have not been posted to the list. Why is there an asterisk there? I tried to run some statistics on that. I wrote up a script that does a Google search on the subject line, but Google restricts me to only 100 requests per day, so I couldn't get it all done in time for this talk. But that would tell me if this has been posted to LKML or not. It's not easy to do this manually unless someone has ideas about that. I'm sorry, what?
Query the patchwork server.
That was my other idea, that maybe I can just query patchwork if there is an API for it. I haven't looked at it though.
We also have a Linaro patchwork, so you can make sure that all the lists you post patches are included there.
Right.
Yeah, there is an API for patchwork, and there's a command line client which wraps it up and is relatively easy to script.
Okay, that's perfect. So I'm going to move from a Google search to a patchwork search. I'll do that.
But not everything gets CC to Linux kernel.
That's another good feedback. So what other...
Depending on the subsystem, some people just post it to one of the mailing lists. It might just be on the ARM mailing list, might just be on the subsystem specific list.
Okay, so I need to start building up a white list of mailing lists that I
So
need to track.
most of the patches get CC to Linux kernel, but not everybody does it.
I wouldn't say it's most based on what I see. Riku's suggestion to use the Linaro patchwork would probably solve this because it does have a fairly wide fire hose of lists subscribed, so you'll probably find it gets 99% of things.
Okay. Yeah, so hopefully the next time I'm doing this, or when I update these slides, the many can be replaced by exact number of patches that have not been posted upstream. So now that we've, so there are several hacks. I'll leave you to read that list, but we've had to do several hacks to get all this to work together. And we need to go back and fix them up correctly and push that all upstream. So now that we've talked about the good, the bad, the ugly for this release, let's go back and talk a little bit about what the patch inclusion policy for the platform kernel is. So it's documented on the wiki. Go and have a look. But really, the wiki is a very, very, very verbose way of saying post it to an upstream mailing list first and then come talk to us. If it's not posted out there, we are going to be very, very, very reluctant to take your patches. So we want to see you demonstrate that effort first. And one simplifying assumption we've made is I'm not going to include any code in there that requires binary blobs to work with, because I have no guarantee of support from the person, from the company, to support those binary blobs.
Can you give an example where this...
GPU drivers, for example.
Oh, user space binary blobs. Okay.
Yes.
Yep.
So if there's user space binary blobs required, and I don't have a stable kernel-side driver, which happens to be the case for several of these drivers, then I don't want to carry the burden. What we will do as part of the build process, the reference platform builds, is once we have that, someone provides us with that driver, we'll make sure that it compiles out of tree with the reference platform kernel.
If it's in Linux firmware.git, is that okay?
I think so.
Okay, because those are binary blobs that you need.
Yeah, so I think I should clarify that it's the bit that the user space binary blobs that also need kernel shim layers to work together. I think GPU is a very good example of that. So I think you know what I mean.
Right, more like the binary blobs that actually execute, not firmware things.
Right. There was a question back there, I think. Nicola, you had a question?
It's been clarified. You should say user space binary
Yes,
blobs,
so-
not binary blobs.
Yeah, sorry. So yeah, I mean, something like DKMS could be worked out for that, and Ricardo and I'll work to make sure that if someone actually gives us that those patches and promises to support us through the kernel revisions, then we'll package it in a way that it just works for the builds. The next slide is for people who don't understand the kernel development process. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this. This is, go and look at it in your sweet time, but look at A and B up there. So basically what I'm saying is keep pushing to mainline. The line in the middle, the green line in the middle is mainline. Keep pushing to mainline. Post it out there on LKML. That's how you get into the reference platform kernel. Once you've pushed it out there, either through the segment groups or through the landing teams, or you ping us directly, and we'll consider picking your patches up and tracking progress of it on the public mailing list. So this is all that it says. And sometimes, as in point B, where things get rejected upstream, they get knacked upstream. We don't want to be carrying around those patches for too long. There might be occasions where you need some time to come up with an alternate proposal because your original proposal was knacked, and so we might consider carrying it in that intermediate term for maybe a release or so, but that's about it. We want to be able to stick to a very clean, upstream-friendly patch stack. So statistics. So total patches about 824, doesn't include merge commits. For C, that's about 427 patches for Dragon Board and 4 other platforms. So think of it this way. So there's a lot of platforms supported in the Qualcomm landing team tree. It's not just the Dragon Board 410C. And then there's 64 out of tree patches for high key so far. On the enterprise side, there's, yeah, I'll let you read that, with 256 for D02, a few patches for Seattle and XGene support, a bunch of hacks. And then the remainder was basically configs, reverts, more hacks. The last line is the most interesting line for me, personally. 50% of these patches, I believe, are under active review upstream, which is great. I mean, so that is, so if things go right, in the next release or 2 or 3, 400 of those patches will just disappear from my delta. And that's what I'm hoping for. I want to be able to reduce that delta. So this is great work from the landing teams, from the enterprise group whose trees we are merging in. This is fantastic. Now the hard part is, what about the remaining 50%? How do we get that out there? How do we get those posted? And in case of some teams, it's just a case of backlog. They are working as hard as they can on some of this stuff. And in some cases, teams need help. So we've been talking about, with the kernel working group and other teams, on how we can help them review some of this code and even help upstream some of this code. Any questions at all on this? All right. So that's the diff stat. And to expand that a bit, oh, it looks like there's the old version of my slides. All right, no worries. But I had a dir stat, a cumulative dir stat, which showed you where most of the changes were, which directories had most of the changes. Unsurprisingly, 60% was in drivers. So that's it. Yeah. So let's go on to what the reference platform kernel isn't. Get it out there. Get it posted to LKML. It's not a replacement for that. If you're trying to post this directly to me, if you're trying to send your patches directly to me, please don't. Please, please, please don't. Please post it to LKML. Please post it to the right mailing list, and it'll all come down through the right channels, whether it's the segment groups, whether it's the landing teams, it'll come down to us. We don't want to create a mother of all BSP kernels, really. I mean, there's a lot of platforms to support here. We don't want to do that. And since this is a 4.4 and Greg has announced this as LTS, a lot of people have come up and say, are you going to support this for long term? No, we are not. We want to move along as quickly as possible to the latest kernel versions. So what is the reference platform kernel? It is a pre-integration tree. Think of it as a pre-integration tree like Linux Next. How many people here don't know what Linux Next is? Oh, great, so I don't have to explain it. So think of it as like Linux Next. If you get your patches in there, you figure out things that are broken, that are conflicts between platforms, between architectures, and everything is good. That's all we want to help with and make sure that we have a good experience as in a build when we merge all of these things together. And yeah, so the other thing reference platform kernel shows is the real delta we have against mainline to actually get these platforms working out of the box on a mainline kernel. So that I think is useful. So the roadmap for the 1606. So reference platform builds are quarterly releases. So we did 1603, and we are going to do one in 1606 and then 1609. So for 1606, the plan is to stay on 4.4. The reasons being we need to do a lot of bug fixes and stabilize this across the platforms. There's several hacks in there that I would like to get rid of, fix a bunch of drivers and whatnot. Maybe add Linaro Android in there so we can actually try to do AOSP builds on the same kernel. And then open up a devel branch on 4.5 for teams that are willing to provide me a devel branch. And I know the enterprise group already has one, the Qualcomm landing team already has one. So I think we should be able to open up a devel branch on 4.5 very easily. And then for 1609, either switch to 4.5 or probably 4.6 by then will make sense. So that's the version roadmap. Very simple. We follow along with the kernel process. Coming back to the second part of my talk, which is bootloaders. And firmware. That's right, Leif. We need to get a reference platform, reference implementation for open platform package up there. Currently, we build UEFI from 3 different source trees for 3 of our platforms. We don't want to do that too long. Please work with Leif and Ard here to get your code into their trees so that I don't have to maintain another tree which tries to consolidate these into one source tree. So please work with them. And we've heard some good things about that this week, which makes me think that at least on the D02 and Hikey, it seems like we are really close, and with a little push, we can actually get that into open platform package. You have a mic?
Yeah, I mean, D02 is near enough that I'm keeping a branch in my tree for that platform support. It needs a little bit more cleanup before it can actually be merged into the main. There's no conflicts or anything. It's just I want the code to be slightly cleaner.
Hey, you're the maintainer.
Well, maybe I'm getting ahead of you, but is there, other than for testing big endian kernels, is there a desire to have U-boot support?
Could you repeat the question?
So, U-boot is mentioned here as allowing testing of big endian kernels.
Yes.
If there were other ways of doing that, would you still want to have U-boot support?
So this is a request that came from the kernel working group, and currently I believe UEFI does not give them a good way of doing this. You have some patches apparently to help fix that. In the meanwhile, the easy option is U-boot. We are going to have to maintain a U-boot tree anyways, because there are still some boards that only support U-boot, and so we have to do a U-boot tree anyways.
Yeah, that was the main reason. Also, I don't know what the state of USB net booting is in UEFI at this point. I know it was being worked on, so maybe that now works well. But that was the other big use case we had in KWG, because obviously reflashing your board with the interesting tooling is not an ideal workflow.
Yeah. Okay, so that's one of the targets for 1606 as well. Get one source tree for the bootloaders, UEFI and U-boot. So that, yeah, targets. Please file bugs. Please use the reference platform build at least once, file bugs against your pet use cases, so we can go work with the concerned teams and fix up some of those bugs. Config fragments. So we have, I've been working on a bunch of config fragments which allow you to only focus on some features of the kernel or some boards. So you might be able to do something like, I'm interested in just a security and on a high key, and you should be able to put together config fragments just to do that. I'm hoping to publish that tree at some point this month and gather some feedback on whether the way I've split up the config fragments makes sense for the other consumers. My hope is that we can then share these fragments within the teams we are working with, so the landing teams, the segment groups, and not have to redo all of these configs again. And putting together all these fragments will basically give us the distro config that I have currently. It's the monster config that I have. And yeah, the other one is the improving the developer experience. So what I call as the edit, compile, deploy. It's really painful for kernel developers and bootloader developers to deploy, locally compile their own versions of the kernel bootloaders and whatnot. For example, on the Android side, on the OSP side of things, you have to basically create one of those fastboot images and use fastboot to load it into memory and whatnot. So figure out ways, figure out shortcuts, and document some of the best practices in order to speed up that process. And finally, what else are we working on? So playing around, experimenting a little bit with Git notes for tagging patches. So whenever I pull in something from a landing team or a segment group, I can start adding tags in there, which basically says some sort of annotation. This is a temporary hack. This has been posted to the list on, and provide a link there, and some. Basically, this is out of band for Git in a sense, in that you don't see it in the commit log, but you can keep changing the tags, changing the notes as the patch goes through the review process upstream. And the nice thing about this is that you can actually share that back with the person I pulled from. So if I pulled from a landing team tree and I did the hard work of annotating all of their patches, I can actually share all of those objects back with the team, so the next time they already have those and they can just update them if they've done a new revision of the patch. I still have to figure out the workflow for that though. It seems to work for a few patches locally. I need to figure out how to do this remotely, and if the other teams would be on board for using some of this. Getting integration scriptable. So it's basically a bunch of branches and that I need to merge together and then supply the configs and then do the build. So make this scriptable, make it really easy to recreate that branch. That way I won't forget things. Remember, I'm a terrible maintainer. So that's something I need to fix. And then there was a suggestion from Mark, which I think is a good one, which is create mainline builds as well. So plain old mainline for all of these platforms, and then say what actually works on mainline and what actually works with all the hardware enablement, all the delta that we are carrying. And that makes sense. The only problem there is the QA effort. Who's actually going to do the work to test features across the mainline build and the reference platform build? So that's something we need to figure out. So that is all I had as far as this talk is concerned. If you have any questions or any discussions, go down.
Thank you. Hello. Yeah, back to a few slides. You mentioned there will be some 4.5 develop branch in RPK.
Yes.
Yeah. So how do you make sure that there is no regressions in the daily base, right?
How do I make sure there's no regressions on the daily basis?
Yeah.
Right. So that is something we need to work out with our QA team and book some of their time. So we actually test the develop branch as well. We don't want the develop branch to be this throwaway branch where no one is doing any testing at all. We want to be able to do some testing, but obviously it won't be to the same level as the reference platform build. So it'll be basic features. We need to come up with a list of those features saying these things have to work in the develop branch.
Yes. So sorry, I have other questions. So when you currently the current 16.03 release is based on 4.4, and moving on, you need to rebase all your patches, the 800 around patches, to the new base, right? 4.5, 4.6.
No, I'm not going to rebase the patches.
Who will
You are
do
going
that?
to rebase the patches. And
So you, in your design, the vendor, the board vendors, landing teams, they need to do this work, right?
Yes.
Okay, I
So,
think this is a point. At
unless,
least
unless
this is a
of
point.
value to them, they won't participate. But from what I'm seeing, you are already doing the work as part of the upstream process, right?
Yes,
You are
yes.
trying to upstream these patches, so you are rebasing your topic branches. So it's just a
Rebasing
matter of
backport to your, maybe the latest mainline is 4.7, 4.8, but you are still working on 4.6. Then I am upstreaming and I need to backport.
No. So if the latest mainline is 4.6 and 4.7, and if you're already giving me 4.6, 4.7 branches, I'll just move to 4.6, 4.7. There's no reason for me to stay on 4.5. That's just an estimate. I can't say for sure where Linus's tree will be in 16.09. It's probably going to be 4.6 with a fair amount of certainty, but there's a chance he may open up 4.7. I don't know yet. So I'll go with whatever you provide me, and at some point. So for the next release, 16.06, it's clear we want to stay on 4.4. So we will just do a 4.5 on the develop branch. But for 16.09, we need to revisit that once we've done 16.06. We need to revisit what the target kernel for 16.09 is.
Okay, another question.
Yeah.
So back to the Linux Linaro phase, they have a process, monthly based process,
Yes.
telling exactly what the chosen rebase version for this month, and when they open the merge window and when they release the first release candidate and when they make the final release. So you have here is a quarterly release plan, and what the major milestones for in your process? Do you have a document, or do you plan to release a
Ricardo
document?
is going to publish that document after we go back from here.
When we can
because
submit?
We need to start establishing that process now. Yes.
That's all my question.
Yeah.
What testing are you doing?
So at the moment we have test plans for CE boards, enterprise boards. There is a bunch of functional testing that's part of the specification on the 96 board. So Bluetooth should work, file transfer should work, HDMI audio should work, things of that sort. And then there is benchmarking, whether it can actually with, I don't know, some IO bench or something, that whether we are able to sustain a certain type of workload and whatnot. There is currently the test spec. Is it publicly available now?
I think it is, but we just got the point with the release where we can actually run the kernels and finally have the build. But like, there's going to be a big focus on the next milestone to start like automating most of the work, like stress IO, the disk, network, and we're also talking today, like for example, testing and validating the firmware as well, that kind of thing. So we're going to be like putting more focus on this. But I think the test plan is open, but we definitely want to open it up.
Yeah.
And then help and suggestions more than welcome.
Before
I think there's
someone back there.
And June wanted the
Yeah,
mic.
Kames. Okay.
Sorry. So
Could you come up here?
there's a situation that there is a release, such as there is a 4.4 kernel, right?
Yeah.
So maybe we want to use this one for a long time. Will you maintain the release? I mean,
the branches are tagged and they're available.
Yeah.
If you're asking me whether I'm going to do bug fixes or security updates and pull back Greg's stable release updates, no, that's not the plan.
Okay.
But you will be able to recreate this particular build at any point in time because it's
so it means that we maybe such as DJ2 Hasidic, if they want to maintain that, should just maintain that branch. I mean,
yeah, you can take that branch and then you can start building on top.
Okay.
Yeah. And this is plain old 4.4. It's not any flavor, no LTSI, no LSK, none of that. So it's plain old 4.4. So you should be able to merge all of Greg's stable updates very easily.
Yep. This is something that we knew that people would ask simply because of 4.4. So they want to continue using that, of course, because long-term supported. The goal for this project is basically to move forward, right? Is help upstreaming. So I know that there is demand to continue supporting that. So I think it's just a matter of like, if the member really wants to keep that pushing, like if we have other members of Linaro, maybe there's another proposition to do it. We just don't want to do it as part of this project specifically.
Koen?
So what will be your testing schedule? You have kernel CI, so you basically get continuous boot testing, but for automated test that you could do with Lava, do you want to do that daily, weekly, monthly? Because with the 3-month schedule, that people are lazy. They will just wait till a week before the deadline to start doing stuff, just due to human nature. It would be nice to say every week we're going to do an automated test and then have a meeting or whatever and go through it, just to
How much can we test automate? I mean, how much of it can be automated today?
Yeah,
I guess
exactly.
That's the question.
Yeah, we're going to figure it out later. But I mean, like we, of course, like want to automate most of the things and automate it like in a commit basis, right? We update it.
So yeah, I would like a
change it
schedule.
and
I
test
would
it.
like a fixed schedule saying on every Friday I get a report
Right.
on what the crack in my dev branch is doing. And it blows up on these platforms. This functionality doesn't work. I would love to have that on a regular schedule. But we need to talk about that.
Right, yeah, because 3 months, that's an awfully long time.
Yes, I agree.
That's fine. We will have like
So
checkpoints
so
between the
it'll be part of
teams,
CI,
yeah.
but at what point in the CI loop do we test? Is it every day, every week, every month? We need to figure out.
Right.
based on resources. And hey, guess what? We have a release manager.
Well, if it's CI, then it's basically you should be running it after every commit or every big merge. Then it's continuous. If it's daily, it's daily testing. It's not CI testing. Continuous.
Do we have resources and do we have enough automation?
We don't know, but we could try. And if it's not enough, then we just go and say to the lab people that we need more.
Lab people already hate us.
They hate everyone.
If they already hate you, you've nothing to lose.
Yeah, I think my question was already asked by this gentleman here, but from device aspects where people deploy, they rely heavily, or at least are kind of coagulating towards, stable releases. But then they expect security fixes and everything on this. So I'm not kind of like getting it, so you'll leave it there, 4.4, leave it there. Then there should be a different entity which should take it to a...
So at that point, your internal teams could take the base that's been provided and build on top of that.
And maintain it.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is a launching platform for productization. It's not a product itself.
Mm-hmm.
But which is why, like a part, as we move forward as well and do like more features and so on, everything would be a topic branch with an explanation. Sometimes, for example, let's suppose, I don't know, like SATA support in 4.4 for this which wasn't, wasn't that stable, wasn't that good at that time, but like it was improved, like the new version of that pad SATA was merged like in 4.6. We're gonna have like, you're gonna have the topic branch on that version as well. So in case you wanna do the work, it's simply just like merging the topic branch from the newer version on the previous kernel. You could do that. We're gonna be exposing all of this. But we're gonna not gonna be in the work of maintaining a kernel long-term supported, including hardware enablement, basically. Because we already have like a long-term supported kernel, but it's keeping the hardware enablement. We're doing this, which includes hardware enablement. I think it's just the gap is natural gap, of course. Okay. Do we want to fix that? At least as part of this project, we don't. But.
So you expect like SOC vendors to take it and then
then stabilize it. I mean, hopefully we'll have figured out most of the critical bugs for you as if you're looking to do cross-platform, use it for cross-platform purposes. And we've figured out a lot of those issues for you. And then you just take that and apply the stable and security updates you need.
So basically there can be multiple SOC vendors coming, using this as a base and feeding you different kernels out of it for their platforms.
Use it as a base either to start mainlining, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So
and also for productizing.
And for productization, yes.
Okay.
So for example, a lot of vendors have a lot of internal QA processes as well.
Yeah.
And they can be a lot better than what we can do inside Linaro.
Right.
And so we can never expect to match that level of QA that's needed for productization.
Yes.
And so it's better to just provide the platform where they can use that. A lot of the big problems have been ironed out, and now you can take that and go through your own productization process.
Yeah.
I know a lot of landing teams already work with the members to do that for their products.
Right. Okay.
I have a question on the benchmarking plan. Yeah. As you said, you will be doing the benchmarking, I think, across all the boards. Are the results going to be public or just
you have to put me on the spot, don't you?
Well, yes.
So
the idea is to make it public.
It's not. So the kind of benchmarking we are trying to do is, are we regressing somewhere in the kernel, for example?
Right.
I mean, should DMA have been enabled for this, and maybe the driver isn't using DMA, that sort of thing. It's not about comparing boards.
The thing is like, as George said in the other presentation, is not necessarily, of course, the boards that are not part of the 9.6 boards program, but those boards are going to be easily available. And we're going to be providing all the tools, all the benchmarking tools. So for someone to do that easily, like they can do it that easily if they just buy the boards and download the software and run it. So they're going to be publishing that. But those results might not necessarily be matching what, like what we expected in that case, because maybe like he got an older version, something's broken in there, like he made a mistake or something along the line. So if we take care of that and kind of through the process, do the benchmarking and publish that, we at least are going to be, we know that we're going to be doing the right thing. And the results are going to be kind of reflecting most of the reality on that platform, for example. But I know that is a tricky thing. People will complain and so on and so forth. So our idea is, of course, like to push the evolution of the development that we do, and like as we enable more platform, to use that as well for us to understand if there's a problem or not, and but that satisfies, like if it was all internal, that kind of is already solving that issue. But we do want to start like exposing that a little bit more, but simply just to keep improving the platforms over time. But I think we're going to figure it out internally. I know that there's always been like a problem in Linaro, because we're not going to be, like we have multiple members collaborating in something, like we don't want to embarrass them separately because it doesn't make sense. We do want to, though, like to try to do something that will improve everything. And
yeah, I think the benchmarking is about not embarrassing ourselves.
Yeah.
Because we put out something that's obviously broken. We didn't flip the right bits and ship something that's obviously broken. So I think it's about that rather than something that can be used to compare across boards and whatnot. That's not the goal.
But people will do that, right? I mean,
they can do that already. So I mean, these are open builds, and people can load whatever on their IO zone or whatever it is they care about, and do it anyways. So
benchmarking is very workload specific. So,
yeah.
It has to be. Yeah. So benchmarking is workload specific. My workload may not be your workload, so I don't think it's any valuable information anyway if it is published. What's valuable is that I can run the benchmarks.
Yeah.
And so you provide the tooling and an easy way for me to not do mistakes but do the right thing.
Right.
And that's part of the builds as well. I mean, already I think QA and some of our teams have already packaged up a lot of those benchmarks.
Right. And the whole
can pull them into the reference build.
Right.
And the whole do your own thing.
And the whole idea about the project is not only the builds, right? It's having the source, having the builds, having the instructions, the documentation, and all the scripts that are used to produce those builds. So like any benchmark script that we use, it's going to be published and well documented. So it's going to be easy for anyone to reproduce that.
So any other questions? So I'd like to call out once again, reiterate again, we don't write a lot of this code. What we are actually pulling the work of a lot of hard work done by landing teams, segment groups, and what we're hoping for is really act like Linux Next and figure out some of these issues as we are trying to upstream some of these platforms. So I'd like to call that out again. That a big thank you to these landing teams and segment groups who are working with us to get this put together. Thank you.